Good day, folks. Thanks for coming to Find the Warmth of Our Sun. I'm Matthew Brown, your host here at Madison 365. You can find us on YouTube, Spotify, Stitcher, and Apple Podcasts. And yeah, that's all of them. Been doing this for too long. So, folks, thanks for coming. Today, going to be talking a bit about critical race theory. So what is critical race theory? And we're going to be, walking through this a bit. First, a little bit of introduction of what's going on. I'm sure a lot of folks have heard about critical race theory at this point. Particularly, it's talked about a lot in the news. Well, currently Republican politicians, primarily I should say Republican politicians, because you are absolutely seeing something similar, particularly from white male moderates and liberals, have strategically labeled basically an honest historical reading of race in U.S. history of racial inequalities as critical race theory. And the media has been parroting this framing uncritically. Critical race theory isn't those things, first off. Most folks bringing criticism to CRT have spent minimal time understanding it, if at all, and get most of the information from people who have spent minimal time understanding it. Those arguments brandish CRT as something it's not. This is not to say there's no such thing as legitimate criticism, but what we're seeing right now isn't. Oftentimes, it's a bad faith argument against CRT and complete misinformation, especially when it's brought again about by so-called moderates and liberals, especially white liberals. I should definitely add that CRT as a frame, and it's really a frame and a lens, was developed in the 80s to counter framing and narratives that was actually adopted by liberals in legal studies, kind of this colorblind narrative. These were predominantly white liberals, along with conservatives within legal studies that have that adopted this framing. There was really the differences between those two weren't wasn't because of their framing when it came to race and racism. So what CRT is not. Let's get that out of the way first. It's not all white people are intrinsically racist. It is not race being the only determinant factor in life. It's also not cultural Marxism. Now, while there's definitely some Marxist theory influence, it's not that. I also should note that accusations of cultural Marxism is a racist dog whistle. Its use and other labels such as socialism and communism of Black liberation struggles go all the way back to the 1800s. This is a common political charge used to dismiss and demean these movements and these ideas and ideologies and theories in the eyes of the public, particularly the white public, which we have done so great in our anti-socialist and communist and Marxist propaganda, so much so that most people use those terms interchangeably and can't even begin to define what any of them actually are, particularly in practice. They're totally neutered labels and accusations at this point. They also insist that CRT is completely subjective and that other white academic narratives are not and cannot be subjective. That these white conservatives, and at times these, again, white liberals and moderates, are the ones being truly objective, or are the only ones being truly objective. In doing so, they also love to point out or grab quotes from MLK, particularly the content of my character, as well as some other quotes. But he's their favorite poster boy, loving to pick, again, these selective quotes to dismiss CRT, while also ignoring MLK's framing of America, especially white America, falls quite close to CRT. that would take an actual reading and studying of King to know he was for far more than what they believed him to be. He did not advocate colorblindness. He did not advocate race neutral ideas or policies. He advocated for reparations, for massive redistributions of wealth, the end of the military-industrial complex, along with the American Empire. MLK also believed and explicitly stated ideas and framings that are pretty close to the core of CRT, such that the USA is structurally racist. The United States was built upon white supremacy. Racism is perpetuated through the law, links between racism and capitalism, and for the fundamental reorganization of society. These are things that Dr. King explicitly advocated for in most of his speeches and writings. I mean, where do we go from here? It's throughout it. His Beyond Vietnam speech and others used a lot of this explicit framing, and he also talked about particularly again the ties of white supremacy and the military-industrial complex and war and colonialism and imperialism. Things that, from my understanding, any CRT scholar wouldn't find out of place in CRT. And additionally, a lot of critics, especially liberal ones, will argue that this is an academic theory, that academic theories have no minimal real-world applications. This is a fundamentally absurd statement. And I can't help but feel, again, using, if you want to use a lens of CRT here, but myself and get there, really using the lens of history and studying U.S. history and the use of language by critics of those fighting for Black liberation. It's quite common. But the statement also ignores and that liberalism is an academic theory. That there's the core aspects, academic aspects of liberalism. They'll ignore this and feel that it's a, fully fleshed out, real world kind of thing. It's an academic theory. They'll also adopt many bunk economic models they follow that are nothing but academic theory. This is also where the rise of applied economics actually came from, is that a lot of the theories of economics are ridiculous. They also support ideas, experts, and theories that come out of academia that align with their worldview. Some of these might be based in hard sciences like climate change models. Others are more social theories. But the point is that they pick and choose what they decide to label as a purely academic theory and dismiss things that confirm their priors as not academic theories. Again, why this is racist is it seems that the only real things they dismiss as academic theories that are only appropriate in the halls of academia with minimal real-world application are issues and theories surrounding that of race. Now, to add, it's not only race. You'll see this for anything what they love to call identity politics. All politics is identity politics, but think gender and sexual studies. And then some of these same folks, though, might fully engage with class-based theories. But again, they won't call those things any class-based theories as identity politics. The dismissal of models and theories and ideas created by Black intellectuals and spread by Black intellectuals as only academic theories and not applicable to the real world is a quite racist framing and behavior. And you see this, it goes all the way back. This isn't anything new at all. But of course, it's that these white men claim that they are the objective truth holders, that they understand the real world, and we do not. So that's everything CRT is not, along with kind of larger social context. So what is CRT? With that said, first, I must disclose that I am personally really recently, within the past year or so, starting to dig into CRT as a theory. I'm far closer to a novice in understanding this theory than I am an expert. So if you do have a deeper understanding than I do and you spend time studying this stuff, I apologize for if anything I get wrong within this. And that said, though, from what I've been reading so far, my own personal analysis and lens that I developed as I have read U.S. history and studied U.S. history and the history of race and racism, landed in a very similar spot as CRT. Much of, I didn't really dive deep early into study or ideology. I've never been big on theories or ideology. I've always felt not that there isn't any use in them. I've always found them a little bit too restrictive or too rigid. I try to explore something from, what is, what isn't it, why, the cause and effect, power dynamics as well. And I look at words and stories in the context of actions and counter narratives. Now, this is an interesting part, and what I'm saying will feel familiar in just a few minutes. But in function, it's not too dissimilar and doesn't clash with critical race theory. Again, because it's a lens that you look through. Most of mine, I just love to read the history and think about how it works through a sociological lens. But at the same time, I'm not a sociologist. It's, again, that studying of human behavior, one knowing we're irrational and power dynamics and selfishness and all these things that we know about, humans and that we can observe through our stories. And that's going to be a key word here in a second. So, okay, I'm just now digging into this, right? But as I think through CRT and then I implore anybody else as you kind of read through U.S. history and don't completely dismiss what you're about to hear. Just think about it. Think that it might have useful applications. Even if there's parts that you disagree with it, you don't have to, fully agree with all of it to believe there might be useful applications. And even then, a disagreement in one part doesn't mean that you should dismiss the whole theory or the whole lens. It just means that you can be critical of this one part of it. But just hold on to it and think about it and keep it in the back of your head as you read through history, as you read through present events. Think about these things. Now, to explore CRT, and since I'm not an expert, I've pulled together a combination of different summaries from people who do have deeper understandings than I do to make sure or to help me make sure this is correct. So this first part is pulled from Professor Uja Anya of Penn State. She says there's 6 core tenets of CRT. Now, I see some other writings that kind of go beyond 6, but we'll stick to 6. So first, CRT is a framework, ideas and understanding about reality and how things operate. This originated in legal studies through the work of Derek Bell, Kimberly Crenshaw, Richard Delgado, Maria Batsuda, and others. It also, and this is beyond what Anya is saying, it has its roots as well, not just in the legal studies in the 80s of these folks, but it goes back further. Again, there's core tenets in MLK and a ancestor of mine that was my dad's godfather and my grandfather's cousin, Leon Higginbotham, who is one of the his legal writings were central, or one of the legal writing, like his legal writings were part of a group of central legal writings that these scholars, like the legal scholars, grew CRT out of. Leon Higginbotham was the first black federal appellate court judge appointed by LBJ, and has very influential legal writings around race within the United States. He was an alternate for Thurgood Marshall until Reagan, amazing man. He actually helped write the South African Constitution, post-apartheid South African Constitution. Anyways, big deal, right? Okay, so tenet 2, critique of the liberal myth. This says the idea all are treated equally with same rights under law, education, housing, other institutions is a lie. So liberal notions of meritocracy or an even playing field, objectivity, race neutrality, such as colorblindness, are myths. This is particularly within function, right? Tenet 3, whiteness as property. This says being white in US is a valuable commodity that gives those who possess this property, whiteness, unearned privileges like preference, authority, exclusivity, legitimacy, greater chance of survival. Example given, police encounters. Black people are more likely to be killed by police than white people. Yes, there's more white people that die at police hands than black people because of population. But when you do the statistical modeling, if you're black, you're more likely to die at the hands of police than white people. It's a disparity. Tenet 4, interest convergence. This says people of color can only advance on mass scale in U.S. institutions. Society when their interests converge, and society when their interests converge with white people's. When whatever benefits people of color also benefit whites. Example given, white women are the greatest beneficiaries of affirmative action. Tenet 5, counter-narrative. This says personal stories, narratives of black people and other people of color are legitimate authorities and evidence that counter-challenge dominant white elite male voices typically treats as sources of standard or objective knowledge. And tenet 6, intersectionality. This says black women especially and other people of color experience racism in unique ways inseparable from and worsened by oppression like sexism, classism, ableism, homophobia. So women's policies, for example, don't affect all women the same. I think those are pretty clear. Eve Ewing, a sociologist at University of Chicago, said, again, it's a lens with a great analogy. She made an analogy that math and math proofs, right? We don't have to go through and prove every time you multiply something by 0 that it is 0. Those that study that they did the proof, this is what it is. That's the math proof, right? Think of it, and so CRT is kind of like this math proof. It did the proof, it did the work. It's a lens where they worked out the proof in a math sense where you don't have to prove every time something racist happens that it is indeed racist. You can just call it racist. You just do the calculation of X times 0 equals 0 without having to do the proof. There are a lot of folks, and I think some might, listening might kind of recourse a bit, that, well, of course you have to prove it every time. Well, it's absolutely exhausting, and it's, again, quite racist because they want us to prove every time something racist happens why it is racist. And then oftentimes the field goals get moved, and there's always this exclusion of it or reasons of it. So it's a mess. Anyways, Professor Anya, though, kind of elaborates a bit beyond those core tenets and kind of keep that idea of it proof in mind. She says, now, CRT was first developed, again, in legal studies. CRT didn't just stay in legal studies. Its ideas and understandings about how things work in the U.S. spread to other areas of study, such as education and politics. It's again, this lens that clarifies racial inequality quite well. It is quite effective in this lens. CRT is, again, this set of principles that there's no racial equality in the U.S. and that racism and white supremacy are baked into laws, policies, practices, and institutions. Example given, education, and quite literally everything. This is why we see Black mortality, regardless of economic class, is lower than white people. It is why Black infant mortality is higher across class than it is for white people. It is why Black men with college degrees are just as likely to get hired or for a job as a white male with a high school diploma and a criminal record. What other explanations do we have for those things? I mean, these lists go on and on and on. She also gives an example of how CRT presents reality and common sense facts about the United States and U.S. society. And everybody knows and understands these things. She said, take, for example, Amy Cooper, the white woman in Central Park, who was recorded calling police on a Black man bird watching. She said the man was lying, saying he attacked her. Cooper tried to use police to harm this Black man. She understood this. And we see this all the time of that threat to call the police because these white women know this threat of police on Black men. She understood two ideas CRT describes, systemic racism and whiteness as property. She knew police would think this Black man was an assailant, which is racism, and her whiteness gave her property or a credibility assumption of innocence he didn't have. We see these things function in real ways. Michael Harry, most folks might know as, just the root writer, but he's quite accomplished, particularly in academics himself. He said, instead of idiotic concepts of colorblindness, CRT says that a comprehensive understanding of any aspect of American society requires an appreciation of the complex and intricate consequences of systemic inequality. And according to CRT, this approach should inform policy decisions, legislation, and within every other element of society. He uses college admissions in an example in saying that people who don't see color insist we should only use neutral, merit-based metrics, such as the SAT scores and grades. However, CRT acknowledges that SAT scores are influenced by socioeconomic status, access to resources, and school quality. It suggests that colleges can't accurately judge a student's ability to succeed unless they consider the effects of the racial wealth gap, redlining, and race-based school inequality. And then without this kind of holistic approach, admissions assessments will always favor white people. So as Harriet says, CRT doesn't just say this is racist. It explains why these kinds of race-neutral assessments are bad at assessing things. And he goes on to say, CRT not only is, according to CRT, not only is racism an ordinary social construct that benefits white people, but is so ordinary that white people can easily pretend that it doesn't exist or minimize its existence. Furthermore, white people who refuse to acknowledge and dismantle this unremarkable racist status quo are complicit in racism because, again, they are beneficiaries of racism. And because white people believe racism means screaming the N-word or burning crosses on the lawn, the idea that somebody can be racist by doing absolutely nothing is very triggering. Let's use, again, the previous examples of college admissions. That's in general kind of what it is. So now I'm not going to say it's absolutely correct. I'm not in a place to fully criticize the theory. I don't have this full intellectual understanding to dissect it as such. And this isn't even a full-on defense of it. It's really kind of a what is this lens? I mean, the CRT lens or those that use it or something similar to it predicted the rise of somebody like Trump. Going all the way back in kind of the 90s, you saw some of these theorists and writers talk about a figure like a Trumpian-like figure and the possibility of the United States, and their concerns were dismissed. People who use this again were even dismissed when Trump ran, and their concerns of Trump and the concerns of him being elected. A lot of these folks had real world fears because through the lens they understood how racial politics worked. Again, all politics is identity politics. And the real threat of somebody like Trump. And now critical race theorists and other folks kind of close to it are being dismissed in their concerns of the anti-democratic GOP, as well as the increasing rise of white nationalism in this country as there being a real anti-democratic threat amongst a violent threat. in a reading of history, we'll see this, and understanding race as a core political and legal tenet in the United States. So now I ask this: what is, I guess, what is a competing theory? I haven't seen a competing theory that addresses the persistent racial disparities across class and in every facet of American life. The behavior of the GOP, the behavior of masses of white people in this nation. Economic anxiety doesn't explain this. Black and brown people have faced economic anxiety for a long time. Deindustrialization has hit Black and brown communities far harder and far earlier. And even then, it ignores some of the details of Trump's base, which were, he won the 100,000 vote and over, and they were on wealthier on average than Biden voters, even though Biden voters were more educated on average. But unless you mean economic anxiety when it comes to access and status in society of white people relative to everybody else. Now, I digress a little bit, but this is really about presenting a clearer understanding of CRT and how the lens operates. Because it's not, about blame all white people or white people are intrinsically racist or born that way, but it shows a clearer picture and persistent behavior of white people when it comes to protecting whiteness as the dominant social class in the United States, be it a conscious choice or a reactive choice. Now, there's parts that I don't know how much I fully agree with, but again, I'm not an expert. And at that same time, if I might not initially agree with part of it, I'm not necessarily fully rejecting it. What I do is I try to, again, think through how it works, apply the lens to different places, and see how it explains the reality or the cause and effect of what we're seeing. So what lens would work better? Well, I don't know. Is there a better explanation for these disparities? Not that I've seen. Until a better one is developed, this is kind of generally the lens, I might push forward. I'm still kind of going to hone and develop my own lenses. This is just kind of my own behavior, but I'm not going to dismiss this. I'm definitely going to be working and diving deeper into this. And questions to ask yourself is, what better way do we have to explain the persistence of racial disparities across class in every facet of American life? Or do you blame the individual? And in doing so, and in cases, this is classic racism. Because that means in blaming the individual or blaming Black people and Black culture and so on and so forth, you're saying that they are or we are responsible for our own social status in society and that there's nothing that is holding Black Americans back. This is, a complete false misreading of U.S. history, because we can't really point to any point where these systemic barriers were fully lifted. And violence and oppression were fully lifted, that racists in power lost power. It's not in function. It's racist in function, right? It doesn't explain the racist pushback against Obama and the rise of Trump, ushering a new wave of white nationalist extremists. Now, there's folks that love to point that identity politics is the reason why people have become fascist. They blame Black and brown people for making white people racist, which is utterly ridiculous. But that, I'm going to end it on that note. I'm hopefully next week I'm going to be bringing in a guest. No promises, but I'm working on bringing a guest to kind of talk through a little bit some of the hard aspects of CRT, to take a little bit of a deeper dive. So we'll hope and wait on that. But with that said, thanks for coming and finding warmth of our sun. And I'm Matthew Brown, your host. I hope you all have a good week, great week. If you like this, again, find us on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Stitcher. Hit subscribe. We definitely appreciate the Facebook watches. It's kind of non-native, and Facebook is trash as it is. Anyways, I digress. But no, folks, have a great week. I hope you all enjoy the weather and stay safe out there. Have a good one, folks.
This is 365 Media.